Hello everyone, I'm Marnix, part of the Bite Me Games team, and welcome to our first devlog. I'll be your host today, guiding you through all that has happened for our game Forge Industries. I've also managed to get the team together, so they can also share some of their experiences throughout the different stages of the game development process in this video. For some context, about half a year ago, me and some friends started working on the idea of an open world, single-player RPG with magical elements and the entire story, and it was going to be a big hit. After some time, however, we came to the shocking realization that this scope was just slightly too large for us, especially since it was basically the first game we've ever made. Also, only one of us really had Unity knowledge, so that also wasn't really going in our favor. So we made the wise decision to put that game idea on the back burner for now. Instead, we figured we would just learn game development with a smaller and more feasible project. And that's where the concept of Forge Industry came. It's an automation game, drawing inspiration from other games like Factorio or Satisfactory, but set in a simpler and different world. You're a blacksmith in a fantasy world that's automating himself into a blacksmithing legend. Since most of us also follow other indie game developers on YouTube, we figured we could also take this opportunity where we are learning about game development and decide to share this with the world as well. Since most game developers on YouTube mostly focus on the process of doing solo indie development, whereas we may have some extra value with us being together. Through these devlogs, we will take you through the process of how we're making the game, as well as sharing some more insight as to what we've learned through the process. We plan on releasing these devlogs once a month, but we'll also release some other game development related content weekly on this channel. Enough of the intro. Let's talk about the actual game. It all started with the Bite Me team originally just wanting to hang out in real life and do something together, as well as perhaps learn some things, particularly learning about game development. This is where we got the idea of a game jam originally. We were going to meet up and for 36 hours simply create as much of a game prototype as possible. Only one issue remained. What on earth were we going to use as the game concept? We wanted to have the concept at least down before we start the game jam, so we wouldn't just figure out everything on the fly and then lose too much time to actually create the game. During a previous meetup, we spewed around with a bunch of concepts. We were first making a puzzle game, then we were considering a small RTS and some other ideas. But in the end, we just landed on something completely else, an automation game. William had previous experience with Factorio, probably the most known automation game, and Jamie also had some kind of experience with these games. So now that we knew the concept, but nothing else really, we just figured out that we would just go on the game jam and see what comes out from the concept. I couldn't contain my excitement though, and I may have started thinking slightly larger scale already. What if we actually took our product from the game jam and applied a bit more love and polish to it and turned it into an actual game? That's how the idea of Forge Industry got started by me on a single afternoon after writing a 13-page game design document. I shared this document with the team who, after some discussion, were pretty much all on board. We were then able to just use this game design document as the foundation for our game jam and got together for that weekend, where in 36 hours we tried to get as much of the core game working as possible. The game design document really helped in hindsight, as we just simply weren't discussing much anymore about, okay, what would we do with these mechanics, because we had already all agreed on them, so we could just reference the game design document and our problem or solution lied there. As Thomas is our CEO, and also the person who brought up the original idea for the game jam, I managed to convince him to share some of his thoughts in regards to what he was expecting from the game jam, which I'll be sharing with you now.
Well, honestly, I didn't really expect anything because the team is still very inexperienced in the side of game development since we were first a software company. But I think this is also very good because that we did the game jam, because this was a great way to let people experience their first, game dev journey, so to say, and experience Unity.
Then it was time. We reached the final day where the game jam started. I do say game jam quite often, but perhaps it's important to state that we do realize that in fact we weren't doing a regular game jam anymore, as per the traditional concept. We were fully invested now, and we had already spent a few days before thinking about how we would implement certain features. Thomas set up a base game version that implemented localization, for example, or a simple cheat menu so we could easily extend upon that when we were debugging in the game jam. Throughout the game jam, everyone was in charge of something else. Jamie and Thomas mostly stuck to pair programming. Thomas was the only one with actual knowledge in how Unity worked, and Jamie was the one who really wanted to learn more about it, as well as he's just a very good programmer who wanted to extend his skill set. William was our art guy, and he really wanted to just purely focus on creating 2D art and UI mocks of the game. He brought out his drawing tablet and he was able to flex his drawing skills quite a bit. As we neared the end of the game jam, he also ended up shifting gears and joined part of the programming to see how much we could salvage of the game. I was in charge of both creating the 3D models, as well as, since I was the one who created the game design document, explaining some mechanics further in real life, and perhaps creating a drawing or anything else with it to further explain my points. The actual game jam itself was a lot of fun. Everyone was hard at work on their respective tasks, and with the advantage of everyone being in the same room, we could get very rapid feedback on anything we created, whether that was a 3D model I made, or a drawing from William, or a code feature that was implemented. Everyone knew it immediately, and we could provide good structured feedback to it. Unfortunately, you do need to remember that if you work on one thing for 36 hours, you do get pretty tired from it, and that's the case with us. At the end of the game jam, we were starting to get quite worn out and not too optimistic. We had implemented some of the core mechanics, or at least the core features, like placing roads and placing buildings, or the system of having workers assigned to buildings, but none of them really fit together and could interact with each other, which was not really what we were hoping for, as that gave us a bunch of systems that really didn't work together and didn't feel like a full game. So after lunch on the second day, we stuck our heads together one last time to make a big push and see if we at least got one thing working. Assigning a worker to multiple buildings and having him walk between it over the roads using A-star. We spent the afternoon coding bravely, but alas, when the clock hit 8, we were very close to having everything working, but all we got were null reference exceptions. So that meant that maybe our game jam, the final result, wasn't as successful as we were originally hoping for. However, we could still be proud, because we got quite a lot of other small things done during the game jam, such as we managed to create the base UI for the game, including how we wanted the menu structure to be and the use of a hotbar. We knew which kinds of resources needed to be stored globally for the user, and that would be used in order to make roads. We also had a way to implement these actual costs, just no way to make those resources yet. We created some brushes for quickly creating multiple stretches of roads. We could rotate buildings, and we had some icons for some main resources as well as some other buildings. We may have been defeated, but we were still proud of our achievement. We just had to finish working on it now in our spare time apart from the game jam, which shouldn't have been too much of an issue, right? Well, we'll see about that one.
So the game jam on its own was a lot of fun, and I did learn a lot. That being said, there are a few downsides that made it a little less enjoyable for me overall, namely my lack of inexperience with the tooling, that being Unity, and also the code base, which is sort of a direct result of me not knowing the tooling and how it worked. But overall, that being said, it was really fun, and especially just hanging out with some of my friends, creating a nice game was really fun.
Do you think it would have been better if you knew more about Unity beforehand?
Definitely, but because I didn't know Unity, I also didn't know how to structure the code correctly, which did cause a big mess, which is one of the reasons that I did lose motivation after the game jam initially.
Well, it was stressful at first during the game jam. It was during 2 work weeks in, so for me that felt like an eternity until I had an actual weekend, and it did burn me out a bit, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of experience that we gained, and it was also a promising result that we had at the end of the game jam, and we have been refining that ever since that weekend. And I think we do have something here that could be interesting to sell.
After the game jam, all of us needed a break though. We only did some slight fixes during the next week. We got the null reference exception fixed and we could finally really assign workers to buildings. We fixed some bugs with road rotations and I redid some road models. But apart from that, there wasn't really that much that was being done. We had sort of dipped in productivity and lost all momentum on the game itself.
Yeah, so the game jam was probably too long. A lot of team members were actually a little burned out, even though it was only a weekend. And this meant they actually lost motivation, and the weeks after the game jam, there was not a lot of, work being done. Though we did step in, and in the end, we found a way to get them motivated again.
I haven't seen my cat in 2 months.
We're a group of friends in the end, so we almost daily meet up to play some video games. So we decided when we play video games, we just have our daily stand-up, talk about what we did. And this is indirectly a cause of, working more because you don't want to show up and say I didn't do anything. So we created a rule, so to say, where everyone has to work at least 5 minutes a day.
This new approach of our daily stand-ups really helped with our productivity, although it didn't last for that long because only a few days later, Thomas and I decided both to take a vacation. Thomas went on a snowboarding trip and I went working on a separate video, which you'll see in a few weeks, so stay tuned for that. Of course, that meant not that much work got done. Thomas in the evening spent some time on reworking the UIs to make it a bit prettier. And William also worked on the roads a bit more so that we had multiple kinds of roads and he wrote the entire algorithm for the rotations of it as well. Once Thomas and I got back from vacation though, and the whole gang was back together, we really saw a strong increase in the momentum we were doing again. We were creating more and more issues as well as solving more and more of these, as well as adding just features in general to the game. This started mainly with the team activity almost of refactoring the grid system. This was something very critical as pretty much everything else in the game was dependent on it and we weren't completely happy with the way we implemented it during the game jam. This was initially Jamie's task, but it was a very big undertaking, so we made it a team activity and worked on it together, giving it a few evenings with multiple sets of eyes to look at the issue. I also started working on the second version of 3D models called paved roads, which William then implemented. What we're aiming for in the game is that depending on which kind of road you'll be using, we'll have a different amount of workers that it can handle at the same time. A brick road, for example, can only handle 10 workers maybe, whereas a paved road can handle 20 of them walking over it concurrently. This way we want to make sure that the player has to think a bit about how they plan everything inside of their game. With these 3D models, it became clear that some of the things I misjudged were also the scale of buildings and roads in games. We were originally aiming for a low poly look. However, when I develop 3D models on my 34-inch screen, it's of course a totally different story when it only takes up a few pixels on the top-down view of our game screen. So that also requires quite a bit of rebuilding, which I started on, lowering the detail and creating everything into an even larger size. Now that the grid builder was also refactored, Thomas was able to implement saving and loading games, since we needed to be able to place buildings on the same location as they were in the save. Because we wanted to also access these save files, we needed a UI that we'll solve later, which Thomas implemented with the plan, of course, to still make them more pretty in the end. We also added another small features like UI sounds, we added a settings menu and some basic localization in a few languages. These features may have been small, but they did help us to, in the final days before recording this devlog, make the game feel at least a bit more like a game and not just like a simple road building and building placement simulator. Of course, whilst I'm writing and recording and editing this devlog, the rest of the team is still working hard to keep adding features, so this may not be everything that we do in this month, so you'll have to come back for next month to get a better look at those. That brings us to looking at the future. What are our main goals for next month? Well, we would be looking to add some more workstation functionalities, as well as finally being able to buy and sell items, as well as having a simple workflow to create a first item. This would really help in just showing off the core gameplay loop of our game. Apart from that, we also want to make the game more pretty. We would love to have some more 2D arts like icons and splash art and loading screens. And as well for 3D art, moving out of the white box stage for some of our workstations and creating a more refined look to everything. Of course, as we are still just developing things, we can't tell if this will actually be the case, so you'll have to come back next month, the 25th of March, when we release our next devlog to see if we've really managed to do these things. That's all for this month's devlog. If you want a more in-depth look at certain topics mentioned in this video, there's also an accompanying blog post that you can find on our site, www.bytemegames.com, which will also be linked with a card that should show up right now. If you like this kind of content and would like to follow along our game development journey, subscribe and don't forget to hit the bell icon. We would love to interact some more with you guys as well. Feel free to share your thoughts with us through the comments below or hit the like button. And apart from that, we'll see you again next week. Bye.
Oké, zoomer.